It's 1942, with the raging World War II. It's summer, but you're flying over the vast and icy expanse of Greenland. You're part of a group of American planes, 6 sleek fighters and 2 sturdy bombers, headed off to join the fight in Europe. But bad weather rolls in. You lose your bearings, and fuel starts running low. Suddenly, you have to make a choice. Attempt a dangerous landing on Greenland's ice cap, or risk crashing. This happened in real life, and they picked the ice cap. The war strategy. World War II was a time of big gambles and quick innovation, especially in the realm of aviation. When the United States entered the war, there was a pressing need to get as many planes as possible over to Europe. The trouble? Shipping them by sea took too long and was downright dangerous, given the ever-present threat of German U-boats. So, military planners decided to fly them across the North Atlantic instead. That might sound simple by today's standards, but in the early 40s, it was a bold move. Short on long-range bombers and cargo aircraft, the US had to rely on ferry routes, a series of stepping-stone airfields that allowed planes with moderate range to hop from North America to Great Britain. Each leg of the journey was tricky, requiring pilots to navigate unpredictable Arctic weather, deal with limited visibility, and calculate fuel consumption with razor-thin margins for error. So why Greenland? Right there in the Arctic area. Greenland might sound like an odd pit stop, but it was a strategic checkpoint. The US had established bases there both to support these ferry flights and to keep an eye on German operations in the North Atlantic. The Germans had a habit of sneaking in weather stations. The harsh conditions made Greenland a formidable site, but it was crucial for refueling and emergency landings. If a plane couldn't make it to Iceland in one go, Greenland was the fallback. Here's what happened. Don't go yet. In July of 1942, a small group of American aircraft took off on this North Atlantic hop. They included 6 Lockheed P-38 Lightnings, fast, agile fighters that were vital for escorting bombers, and 2 B-17 Flying Fortresses. Their goal? Reach Britain and strengthen the Allied air forces hammering away at Nazi Germany. But as they flew toward Greenland, Mother Nature had other plans. Bad weather, thick clouds, and diminishing fuel forced the group to land on Greenland's ice cap, a daunting but ultimately life-saving decision. This group of 8 planes has come to be known as the Lost Squadron. Once safely on the ground, the crews waited for rescue. Luckily, all the airmen were eventually saved, flown out by other aircraft. However, their planes were left behind. At first, people figured they'd be easy to retrieve later. After all, they were just sitting there. But that plan fell through. Over time, heavy snowfall and shifting glacial ice slowly buried these aircraft, sinking them deeper and deeper into the cold. To the rescue. Rescue teams, battling extreme cold and tricky flying conditions, managed to extract the stranded airmen in the days that follow. In a place as isolated as Greenland, that alone feels like a minor miracle. Nobody's frostbitten, nobody's lost in the blinding snow, and none of the crew members end up seriously hurt. The planes, however, aren't so lucky. Left in the middle of an ice cap, they gradually vanish beneath layers of snow and shifting glacial ice, earning their nickname as the Lost Squadron. For decades, people swapped tales about these aircraft, wondering if they could really be retrieved. Fast forward to the late 80s and early 90s, when a determined team sets out to find at least one of the Lost Squadron planes. The story of their search is half treasure hunt, half expedition, a mix of drilling through solid ice, using ground-penetrating radar, and a hefty dose of stubborn perseverance. Eventually, they locate a P-38 Lightning buried around 260 feet below the surface. Excavating it is like a surgical operation. They melt a narrow vertical shaft down to the aircraft, then cut it into sections and carefully haul each piece to daylight. The plane is christened Glacier Girl once she's free from her icy tomb. Bringing Glacier Girl back to life isn't just a matter of hosing off a little frost. Years of painstaking work go into cleaning, repairing, and rebuilding the warbird so she can fly again. When that day finally came in 2002, it's a jaw-dropping moment in aviation history, seeing a P-38 that spent half a century under the ice take to the skies once more. People from around the world tune in, eager to catch a glimpse of a living relic. Glacier Girl quickly becomes a symbol of perseverance, a reminder that with enough grit and know-how, even a buried plane in the Arctic can be resurrected. As for the other planes from the Lost Squadron, they're still out there, locked away in the ice. Some might think it's only a matter of time before someone else goes digging for them. Others figure we should leave them be, letting history rest where it fell. Whatever the future holds, the rescue of Glacier Girl and the dramatic story of the Lost Squadron remains an extraordinary testament to human resourcefulness, the pull of adventure, and the unstoppable drive to recover and celebrate pieces of our shared past. Scientists, aviation historians, and other experts who've studied the Lost Squadron over the years have pieced together quite a bit about the aircraft, their location, and the forces at play beneath the Greenland ice. Let's have a rundown of what they generally know and understand. What science discovered? Military logs, mission reports, and personal accounts from the crew members confirm that 6 P-38 fighters and 2 B-17 bombers were forced to land on the Greenland ice cap in July 1942 due to bad weather and low fuel. All the men were safely rescued soon after, but the planes were left behind. Now there's the knowledge and analysis on the depth and movement of the ice. It's another story. Greenland's ice cap isn't static. It moves like a slow conveyor belt. Over time, these planes have been carried away from the original landing coordinates by the shifting ice. Accumulation of snow and ice. In the decades after the landing, snowfall compacted into ice, burying the aircraft. By the time the P-38 Glacier Girl was found and recovered in the early 90s, she was about 260 feet, 80+ meters, below the surface. Because the ice is continuously moving and reshaping, experts know the planes won't stay in the same spot or at the same depth indefinitely. Glaciologists can estimate general drift rates, but pinpointing exact locations at any given time remains challenging. Beneath the ice, temperatures remain consistently low, which can preserve materials far better than if the wreckage were exposed to the elements. While the cold slows down corrosion, the planes aren't in a perfect vacuum. They're subject to moisture and possible damage from ice pressure. Still, experts generally agree that the fuselages, engines, and other key parts are likely in better shape than if they'd been exposed to open air and humidity for decades. Recovery challenges and techniques. Ground-penetrating radar, GPR. Scientists and explorers use GPR and related remote sensing technologies to locate deep-buried objects within the ice. This is how teams identified the depth and rough positions of some Lost Squadron planes. Melting and tunneling methods. The successful recovery of Glacier Girl involved melting a vertical shaft through the ice and cutting the plane into sections. Experts know that repeating a similar operation for other aircraft would require major funding, specialized equipment, and favorable weather conditions. Logistical obstacles. Beyond locating the planes, experts point out the harsh environment and high costs of Arctic expeditions. Transporting recovered wreckage out of Greenland involves complicated logistics. No one has fully excavated the remaining 5 P-38s or the 2 B-17s, so their exact condition is unknown. However, given the success with Glacier Girl, there's reason to believe those planes might also be at least partially salvageable. Scientists suspect that ice pressure and glacial drift could have twisted or broken some parts. Even so, the cold environment remains one of the best natural preservation agents. Historians view these buried planes as artifacts from World War II, offering insight into the technology, materials, and engineering of the early 40s. Experts debate whether it's worth mounting another major recovery effort. Some argue the historical and educational value justifies the immense cost, while others believe it may be best to leave the planes where they lie, part of Greenland's unique heritage. As global temperatures rise, Greenland's ice cap is thinning or retreating in some regions. Scientists note that changes in ice thickness or movement could eventually expose some parts of the wrecks. Any future retrieval project would need to weigh the ecological impact, including the potential for fuel or other contaminants leaking from the aircraft. Researchers and Arctic regulators tend to keep a close eye on such ventures. Experts have a solid grasp on the Lost Squadron's history, where the planes likely are, though the exact positions shift over time, and what sort of conditions those aircraft might be facing beneath the ice. They also know the high cost, logistical complexity, and potential rewards, or pitfalls, of trying to recover more of them. Whether more expeditions will ever attempt to unearth another piece of the Lost Squadron remains an open question, but for now, scientists, historians, and aviation buffs alike continue to study these hidden WWII relics to better understand both the past and Greenland's dynamic environment. Behind that dramatic tale of buried warbirds lies something even more fascinating: the gritty art of survival displayed by the men who walked away from those forced landings, still very much alive. The survival. In any survival scenario, recognition of reality is the first major step. For these pilots, the moment they saw conditions were getting worse and their fuel gauges were dropping, they understood the stakes. Rather than risk a mid-air disaster, they set the planes down in a makeshift formation on the ice cap. That decision, made under pressure in the cockpit, saved all of their lives. Sure, the planes were left behind, but the act of survival is often about making tough trade-offs. Greenland's environment is about as inhospitable as it gets. Even in July, temperatures can plummet below freezing, the wind whips along the ice fields, and there's nowhere to run for cover. The Lost Squadron airmen suddenly found themselves camping on a frozen desert. Survival in this scenario demanded discipline. The aircraft themselves offered some refuge from the wind. Anything that could block or reflect heat was used. Uniforms, and whatever else they had on board, had to be carefully rationed. In those days, Arctic issue gear wasn't as advanced as modern polar equipment, so they layered up with whatever they had available. It's easy to forget that melting snow for drinking water can be time-consuming and energy-draining without the proper gear. The men relied on emergency rations, and any chance to melt snow was a battle of time and resources. Sometimes survival hinges on outside help. After the forced landings, the pilots radioed for assistance. Fortunately, Greenland was a strategic outpost for Allied forces, so rescue teams were mobilized. But the process wasn't simple. Locating the downed planes. The ice cap is an enormous, monochromatic wasteland. Spotting a handful of grounded aircraft, even big ones like a B-17, isn't a walk in the park. Hazardous weather. Rescuers had to work within short weather windows. A whiteout could delay or even cancel any flight in or out. Limited medical resources. If anyone had been seriously injured, field treatment would be minimal. Thankfully, the landings were controlled enough that no one was badly hurt. Despite these obstacles, rescue planes eventually reached the downed flyers, ferrying them off the ice cap in stages. Their skill in staying alive, coupled with the determination and ingenuity of the rescue teams, meant everyone survived. Surviving in a bleak, punishing environment isn't just about rationing food or keeping warm. It's about fighting despair. Being stranded in the Arctic can weigh heavily on morale. The Lost Squadron airmen had the advantage of being together. They could rely on camaraderie. When one person got anxious, the group helped keep spirits up. In any survival situation, optimism paired with practical action can be just as life-saving as a solid supply of food. There's a reason the Lost Squadron story endures. It's not just the drama of leaving WWII planes behind, though that's certainly an attention grabber. It's also the fact that a group of men managed to land on one of the harshest places on Earth and walk away with their lives. Here are a few takeaways. Even a little bit of foresight, like emergency rations, radios, and knowledge of how to handle Arctic conditions, can make all the difference. Knowing when to change plans, like landing instead of pushing on, is crucial. Sometimes the safest choice feels like a defeat, but it's actually the smart move. Working together under stress, sharing resources and keeping morale high can tip the scales between survival and tragedy. Nature calls the shots in places like Greenland. Understanding and respecting the environment is the first rule of survival. In the end, the Lost Squadron's immediate survival story is overshadowed by what happened to those planes afterward, namely the later recovery of Glacier, a P-38 pulled from 260 feet of ice decades later. But the men who set those aircraft down and managed to survive in such a brutal place deserve just as much recognition. Their story is a testament to the power of quick thinking, adaptability, and faith in one another. We talk a lot about the achievements of WWII, the big battles, the famous generals, the turning points of history, but sometimes it's these quieter moments of human triumph against nature's odds that are most inspiring. The Lost Squadron might have been literally swallowed by the ice, but the art of survival they demonstrated still stands out as a shining example of grit and determination in one of the world's harshest environments. Beyond the crush. There's something undeniably captivating about a plane from World War II resting silently beneath the Greenland ice. It's not just a piece of metal, it's a story. When people first hear about the Lost Squadron, their imaginations take flight. picturing brave young pilots forced to land in a frozen desert, and the remarkable moment years later when one of their aircraft, Glacier Girl, was miraculously recovered. There's a sense of awe mixed with nostalgia, as if we've stumbled upon a time capsule holding echoes of courage, sacrifice, and sheer determination. For many, the emotional impact stems from the fact that these planes belong to real people with families, hopes, and fears. The Lost Squadron pilots were ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Their quick thinking and teamwork ensured they survived an emergency landing in one of Earth's harshest environments. Hearing that these men not only made it off the ice safely, but also contributed to the war effort afterward, creates a powerful connection across time. It's a reminder that behind every warbird and every mission, there were human beings, somebody's son, husband, or friend, doing their best under unimaginable stress. After carefully hauling out the parts and transporting them back to the US, an extensive restoration project kicked off. It was no small feat. They had to rebuild and replace key components, track down authentic parts, and rely on historical references to piece the plane together exactly as it was. Then there's Glacier Girl, the P-38 so famously rescued from more than 200 feet of ice. Seeing pictures of that plane's twisted frame emerging into daylight after decades underground is almost surreal. It's a potent metaphor for how the past, though buried, can rise again in the present. Aviation enthusiasts rejoiced at the idea of bringing a genuine WWII fighter back to life, but the emotional resonance reaches beyond the aviation crowd. This event captured the attention of anyone who's ever wondered about lost treasures or marveled at the resilience of old machines, and by extension, the people who built and flew them. In 2002, that dedication paid off with Glacier Girl's triumphant return to the skies. This WWII fighter, which had literally been frozen in time, roared back to life. The flight wasn't just a thrill for aviation geeks, though it was certainly that. It was a moment packed with historical weight. The plane symbolized not only American ingenuity from the 40s, but also modern-day perseverance, a reminder of how we keep our past alive through effort, curiosity, and determination. For a lot of people, Glacier Girl's successful flight stands as a testament to the blending of history and adventure. It underscores how stories of the past can be revisited and re-experienced in real life, rather than just in museums or textbooks. When you see old black and white photos of WWII-era fighter planes, you might think of them as relics. But Glacier Girl's journey from an icy tomb to soaring over runways again shows that with enough dedication, what's old can feel brand new and vivid once more. It's a piece of living history, a plane that defied time and ice, reminding us that some stories are just too good and too important to remain buried. Culturally, the Lost Squadron ties together themes of exploration, innovation, and reverence for history. We love a good underdog story, and these expeditions to find and restore a warplane under tons of ice certainly fit the bill. People often feel a surge of pride that something thought impossible, recovering and flying a plane that literally sank into a glacier, was achieved through grit and ingenuity. And it's not just an American story either. WWII was global, so folks all over the world connect with the notion of retrieving these relics that embody a piece of our shared past. In the end, the Lost Squadron and Glacier Girl reflect much more than a cool adventure tale. They remind us of the human stories behind historic events, of the ongoing fascination with unraveling secrets hidden by time and nature, and of the power of collective memory. Every rivet, every wing strut, and every engine part pulled from the ice represents not just one plane's resurrection, but a link in the chain of people who risked everything to shape the world we live in today. And that's something that can still give us all a tingle of awe, whether we're aviation buffs or just lovers of a darn good story. Archaeology of modern artifacts. When most people think of archaeology, they picture dusty ruins, ancient pottery, or maybe dinosaur bones, not World War II fighter planes. Yet the discovery and recovery of the Lost Squadron in Greenland is a perfect example of how archaeological methods can apply to far more recent artifacts. These warbirds, entombed under layers of ice since 1942, offer a fascinating look into modern archaeology, where tools, techniques, and mindsets usually reserved for unearthing ancient sites get repurposed to explore the relatively recent past. Artifacts aren't strictly limited to relics thousands of years old. They can be anything that humans have created or used, including WWII aircraft. The Lost Squadron's 6 P-38 Lightnings and 2 B-17 bombers are no less archaeological, simply because they date back a few decades instead of a few millennia. They represent a snapshot of the war-era technology and craftsmanship, preserved in an environment that essentially acted like a time capsule. In typical archaeological digs, researchers deal with dirt, sand, or maybe underwater silt. In Greenland, the dig site is 200+ feet of compacted snow and glacial ice. This environment presents some unusual advantages. Low temperatures help slow corrosion and decay. Limited oxygen beneath tightly compacted ice can reduce the chemical reactions that might otherwise degrade metal. Sealed context means that once those planes were buried, they weren't much disturbed by scavengers or natural weathering beyond the steady pressure of the moving glacier. All of this contributes to the idea of these planes being frozen in time, allowing archaeologists and engineers to study them in an unusually well-preserved state. Just like traditional archaeology, locating and excavating the Lost Squadron involved. Researchers used ground-penetrating radar to pinpoint where, exactly, the planes ended up after decades of drifting ice. Rather than shovels and brushes, the team employed a device called the Super Gopher, which melted a vertical shaft down to the wreck. The premise, though, was similar to any meticulous dig. Remove the overburden, in this case, ice, without damaging the artifact. Throughout the process, everything was photographed, measured, and catalogued. Standard archaeological procedure to maintain a clear record of how artifacts were found. Once the pieces reached the surface, they needed to be preserved and restored, much like how archaeologists treat fragile pottery or skeletal remains. Why go to all this trouble? Because these planes tell us about war material culture in a very direct way. When you think about the technology of the 40s, it's easy to rely on textbooks and old photographs. But seeing an actual P-38, or its engines, cockpit gauges, and bulletproof glass can reveal nuances that documents alone miss. From the way the metal rivets were placed to the exact composition of the alloys, these details paint a picture of industrial capabilities, resource allocation, and design priorities at a pivotal moment in history. Even though these are modern artifacts, there's a deep human element here, something that archaeology always aims to uncover. Each plane had a pilot, a mission, and a set of experiences leading up to that forced landing in 1942. Artifacts like uniforms, personal effects, or even the little scribbles on cockpit panels can shed light on the daily lives of warflyers. It bridges the gap between a purely mechanical relic and the people who once relied on it for survival. Traditional archaeology often involves a debate. Should we excavate a site, or is it better, for preservation or ethical reasons, to leave it untouched? The Lost Squadron is no exception. Some believe the remaining planes should be recovered to preserve them before ice movement crushes them, while others say the cost, difficulty, and environmental concerns may not be justified. This conversation echoes the broader archaeological community's discussions about disturbing burial sites or historically significant shipwrecks. The term archaeology might conjure up visions of pyramids and Roman forums, but the fundamental questions: who were these people? Why were they here? What can their material culture tell us? Are the same, whether the site is 2,000 years old or 80. In Greenland, the Lost Squadron proves that even within living memory, archaeology has a role to play. By applying systematic methods to retrieve and study these planes, experts are preserving a slice of history for generations to come. Ultimately, the Lost Squadron reminds us that archaeology can, and should, extend beyond classic ancient sites. The discipline is all about understanding the human story through the things we leave behind. In this case, those things just happen to be iconic war aircraft encased in ice. The lessons gleaned about technology, culture, and the raw human experience shine as brightly in the modern era as they do for civilizations long vanished. It's no secret that air travel has come a long way since the days when planes could just get stranded on a massive sheet of ice. How far is humanity from this crushed tendencies in ice? We do not want another Society of the Snow movie, do we? Improvements in aviation. We hear stories like Glacier Girl P-38 or the Lockheed Constellation Pegasus in Antarctica. and they remind us of a time when Mother Nature could easily overpower human technology. Today, though, getting stuck in ice and glaciers isn't something pilots or passengers lose sleep over quite as much, thanks to the continuous improvements in aviation tech and procedures. First off, one of the biggest game changers is better weather forecasting. In the past, pilots had to rely on more basic instruments and sketchy meteorological data to guess if conditions were good enough to land in remote areas. Now, satellite imagery, advanced radar, and real-time data help flight crews see trouble, like a massive snowstorm or icy runway, long before they're anywhere near it. If a storm looks too risky, flights can be delayed, diverted, or rerouted well ahead of time, drastically reducing the chance of an unplanned stop on a glacier. Then there's the equipment on the aircraft itself. Modern planes are fitted with sophisticated de-icing and anti-icing systems that keep critical surfaces, like wings and engines, clear of ice buildup. Specialized fluids, heated surfaces, or even inflatable boots on leading edges help shed ice and prevent it from forming in the first place. This tech has become standard on many commercial and military aircraft, meaning that even if you run into freezing temperatures, your plane is far less likely to be crippled by icy accumulations. Avionics and navigation tools have also taken a massive leap forward. GPS was a big milestone, but the technology has evolved into highly accurate systems that can pinpoint a plane's position within a few feet, even over remote areas. Pair that with computer-assisted takeoff and landing systems, digital flight management systems, and terrain awareness warnings, and you have layers of safety that pilots from earlier eras could only dream about. These advancements don't just help avoid ice, they also provide better options for diverting to safer areas when conditions get dicey. On the ground, improved airport and airstrip infrastructure, like heated runways, advanced snow clearing operations, and better runway lighting, makes it easier for planes to land safely without skidding off into a snowbank. In truly remote spots like the polar regions, specialized ice runways are meticulously maintained, and there are strict protocols in place that dictate when planes can land, what kind of cargo they carry to keep weight in check, and how many flights can operate under extreme weather conditions. Even rescue operations have stepped up significantly. Modern search and rescue aircraft are equipped with infrared and radar that can detect downed planes or people on ice, day or night. Communication technology means a pilot can call for help immediately if things go south, and rescue teams can respond faster and more effectively than ever before. All these improvements might sound a bit nerdy, but they boil down to one very cool thing. Flying through or to places with freezing conditions is so much safer than it once was. Ice might still be a force of nature we respect, but the odds of a plane ending up permanently lodged in a glacier are now extremely slim. Sure, it makes for fewer dramatic adventure stories, but for most of us, boring is good when it comes to air travel. After all, the best flights are the ones where you land exactly where and when you planned. You have reached the end of the video. We'll see you in the next story, perhaps the Lockheed Pegasus in Antarctica. Thanks for watching.